The annual appraisal, is it something that you look forward to as a development opportunity, a chance to find out how you've done, something that gives you some useful feedback about how you can improve over the year to come? Or is it something you dread, a form-filling exercise which neither the appraiser nor the appraisee wishes to attend, a time suck and an experience from which you really don't learn anything? If you've ever wondered how appraisals can be made better and what you can do to help make that happen, then this is the episode for you. I'm Jeremy Klein, and this is Change Work Life. Hello and welcome to Change Work Life, the show that's all about beating the Sunday evening blues and enjoying Mondays again. How do you know how you're doing at work? Do you have regular feedback sessions, or do you only find out what people think about you during an annual appraisal process? Appraisals can seem like a massive chore for both appraiser and appraisee, but does it have to be like that? Can the appraisal process be a positive development experience for all concerned? And if so, how? To help answer these questions, I'm delighted to be joined this week by Lucinda Carney. Lucinda is a chartered psychologist with 20 years corporate HR experience, and she's the founder of Actus performance management software. Lucinda also hosts the HR Uprising podcast and is the author of the book, How to Be a Change Superhero. Lucinda, welcome to Change Work Life.
Hi, Jeremy. Thank you very much for having me on.
So why don't we start by you telling us a bit more about what you do, what Actus is, and who you help?
Sure. And I guess it links into the purpose of your podcast in that in 2009, I decided to stop working within corporate work environment, having been head of learning and development and various roles like that, and set up on my own business. So I set up initially Advanced Change as a consultancy, delivered training consultancy and change consultancy, hence the name, and quickly realised what I wanted to do is build something. I wanted to have a product really, so it was something that was more scalable as a business. And I acknowledged that certainly at that time, there was very little out there in the way of appraisal software or performance management software. There wasn't very much of it out there then. That has obviously changed quite a lot. And I had direct experience of doing that within my previous role. We'd actually built an in-house system. The whole purpose of it was to try and encourage more engaging conversations, so more sort of regular people management conversations to mean that people feel valued, were having more meaningful relationship with their line manager, understood clearly what the expectations were around their job. So at the time, and still is, the term employee engagement was quite a commonly understood term. And employee engagement is to do with how motivated we are to do our jobs, to bring extra sort of effort into our jobs. And it's also links to how long people stay in an organisation, and how, to how much they perform. So I became really interested in trying to encourage more meaningful ongoing conversations as opposed to the tick box painful appraisal that we've all experienced, and brought to market Actus, which is our software. We've obviously been going for 10 years now, and our software now is all about encouraging ongoing conversations around objectives, also around development, around career aspirations. And it also supports learning, so people can support learning, or you get 360 feedback. So it's got a number of elements to it. But at the core, it's about encouraging people to just have regular conversations, because the evidence in terms of the psychology evidence is that what actually drives high performance is clear objectives and regular feedback. Appraisals don't do it. Appraisals are more for the organisation. So that's what we're passionate about trying to encourage.
What took you out of corporate? Why did you leave the corporate environment?
I felt I'd done everything that I was going to do there. So I worked for a pharmaceuticals company first, and then I become senior in that one. I moved to Siemens, which is where I was about 10 years, and the telecoms bit. And I'd become quite senior in that role. I'd ended up being responsible for all elements of learning and development. And I got to a point where I just felt like I wasn't learning anything anymore. And I live in Hertfordshire, and I felt that my next thing I'd have to do is probably go into London to go to the next level job. the next challenge. And I didn't want to do that. So I had young children, and I didn't really want to start having to commute on a regular basis. So I think I just felt it was time to try a new challenge and do something different. So it was kind of moving away from, I like to change. I do like change. I like to be stimulated and challenged. And the role had become quite samey. They were going through a transformation. They were going to be bought as well, were a different piece. So in actual fact, I could see that was coming. So I had the opportunity to negotiate myself a redundancy exit. So that was quite helpful.
What was it like developing a software product? Because you come from an HR background rather than a software and computing background. So what was that like? I mean, that must have been quite scary, actually.
Naivety is a wonderful thing. I just did not realise what was it. I thought, how hard can it be? Build some software and then you sell it to lots of other people, and that's really, happy days. You're making money from selling something, creating something once, which is complete tosh. But it's a learning curve in terms of that. There's so much to learn with it. My friends who are more technical than I am, because clearly I don't develop the software, think it's hilarious that I'm in a software business, given that I am much more of a people person. But the benefit, I guess, was that I knew clearly what the software needed to do. So our customers are people who do the job that I used to do. So very often, so people in an organisation, in a blue chip organisation or a mid-sized organisation, I understood the pain points that I wanted our software to address. So that was the benefit in terms of I had the vision. In terms of developing it, we went through various challenging. There's a point when I was earning money through delivering training in order to pay for the developers. So I would be up at the crack of dawn because we had our developers were in India at the time. So I'd be on a call with them 5 o'clock in the morning, telling them what to do and telling them what the software needed to do, and they'd be developing it. And then I'd be going off and doing a day's training. So it was really, really challenging at that stage. And I was also running a business. Setting up a business is really challenging because I was doing everything from that, doing the sales, also funding it. I was I am the primary breadwinner as well. So it wasn't an option just to play around at it. Fundamentally, if I was to do software, would I do software again? Yes, it is it's definitely a good thing to do in terms of people do need software solutions, but you have to keep on investing and investing and investing. So it's not something to take on lightly, in that we've got full-time developers who we're always having to keep the software, whether it's adding new functionality, making sure obviously it's secure. It's just a never-ending element to it. So that's the challenge. I would say. So probably I would have gone and got some investment earlier in hindsight, because I was quite early to market, had quite a strong vision, knew what it needed to do, and probably could have scaled it faster had I thought about it that way.
Interesting. No, that's very interesting to hear the background. So let's start with a really broad question. What is the purpose of the appraisal process?
I think it depends on whose perspective you're looking at it from. And the reality is, I would say the purpose should be to engage, as I was talking about employee engagement, it should be to ensure that somebody has clarity about their performance, their expectations, they feel valued, they understand what their priorities are, and they feel that they have that the organisation values them as a person and they know their role in it. So that's what it really should be about. And I think it's a punctuation point. From some organisations, it's seen as having it's something that's needed from if they do performance-related pay, for example, or if they want to do career planning. So that's why it becomes an annual process for lots of organisations, but that's more of an internal driver that HR need it to do something in order to be able to decide who gets paid what. So that's where it becomes a challenge, I think. But at the core of it, the purpose is to get somebody to make sure someone knows what's expected of them and they feel developed and supported. And that's why a once-a-year process doesn't work. Even less so with hybrid working remotely. People need to be talking at least monthly with their line managers. The early days of home working, I think even weekly, some people would need to. So the issue is the fact that the conversations are not happening on a regular basis enough, or quality conversations might not be. And then it becomes this sort of annual, feels like it's really lengthy and a bit too painful. And people also get worried about it, and they get built up to it as well. You can get quite anxious about it. And that happens if people, again, are not having those regular conversations with their line managers throughout the year about not just tactics, but about how they're doing, what their objectives are and what's expected and how they're performing.
And these regular conversations, presumably you're talking about one-on-one conversations. So you're not just talking about, the regular weekly team meeting or something like that.
I think it does need to be, people need to have they need to have clear objectives or clear deliverables. They need to know what they're accountable for and have some level of feedback against how they're doing against those accountabilities. And I think, a monthly one-to-one is a really good frequency. The challenge you often have with informal one-to-ones is that they're quite tactical. So the line manager might be sort of saying, how are you doing with that? And have you done that? Have you done that? Whereas actually making it a little bit more strategic and saying, right, we've got this overall business objective that you're responsible for completing. How are we doing against that? What support do you need? What development do you need? So it's more of a coaching conversation. And if there was more of that going on, then actually arguably you don't really need the appraisal. It's just a punctuation, unless there's a punctuation point. It's much, much less onerous a task as well if those conversations are happening throughout the year.
So what's gone wrong with appraisals then? Why is it that in many organisations it is this annual box ticking exercise? I mean, I have heard appraisers say, we're doing this because we have to do it, not because they appear to have any interest in the process themselves, let alone what the appraisee thinks. So what's gone wrong with it?
Well, you just put that example, because we have to do it. That is one of the things that's wrong with it. And I say it's not actually the appraisal's fault for somebody the appraisal. It's to do with the appraiser not seeing a value in the exercise and not seeing the bigger picture of why it's so important to have that conversation. And I actually personally, I think the issue is more about, particularly here in the UK, we don't value the role of the line manager. That's what I think the issue is. So actually, people managers, they are all too often they might be a player manager, let's say. So they've got loads of work to do themselves, and managing people is something that they don't see a value in, or they see it as a blocker to their day job. Also, we're particularly poor as a nation, at investing in training line managers, so they don't understand or feel that that's valued. Loads of people go into a line management role, they learn on their feet. They've never had good line management modelled from their manager, so they go through the motions from it. So fundamentally, it's people just not. If we don't see that line management, if we only see line management as something that you have to do, as say a blocker to the day job, or it's something that it's a career move, it's the only way to get a pay rise. So it's to become a manager of people. And I haven't got the people gene, let's argue. I'm really not that interested in it. I'm not motivated. Then I would see the appraisal as something that I've got to go through the motions. If I am passionate about getting the best out of my people and I feel respected, and my organisation culture emphasises the value of people management, and I've been trained in it, then I understand that it's really important. It's one of the most important conversations I can have. I should be talking to people regularly. I'm supporting them and helping them to perform. So to me, the issue, I believe, is the way we view people management. We don't respect people management as a profession particularly. We don't value it. We don't invest in it. Therefore, people perceive appraisal as being a valueless activity, when actually it's probably one of the most important, or sort of people management is very, very important. Appraisal is part of that.
Does this failure to recognise and support line managers, is this an organisational thing? I mean, presumably it must be, rather than it just being the wrong person. I mean, someone can or stands a better chance of being a better line manager if they're properly supported and empowered to do so, without worrying about how much of their own work they've got to do, as well as these line management responsibilities.
It is interesting because it isn't an organisational level, I guess, a cultural level. So you can look at it lots of ways in terms of, so is line management valued within a particular culture or an organisation? And that would be, to what degree are people supported? If they go into a management role, are they given training? Are they supported? Is there a clear set of expectations as to what good people management looks like within that organisation? Do they expect people to have monthly one-to-ones? Also, is it HR driven, or is this something that's really role modelled, like good quality people management throughout the organisation, from the board, right way down, senior managers all the way down? Do they model one-to-ones? Because that goes a long way to doing it, and those are prioritised and seen as key. So it's really not rocket science at all, but I think it's also hard because people get so busy. We all feel very busy and we're always in a rush. And so if things are not scheduled in and seen to be important, then they soon sort of get put to one side. And again, that's it gives you the impression that people are not valued in the organisation, and long term you'll have that engagement gap. And then finding time to train people. So managers perhaps not being given training. One of the things that's been really exciting over the last 18 months for us is that the advent of Zoom, as we're talking to each other now, and using virtual means, due to COVID, we all became, suddenly it was something which you would consider doing. And so we now run a virtual manager program, and that has been so popular during COVID. And the interesting thing about it is, because it's blocks of 2 hours and it's virtual, somehow you can make the time to do it. Whereas I think traditional line management training programs would be 2 or 3 days and people would be too busy to go on it. So perhaps, or it was too expensive as well. So there's the two things, in terms of expensive in terms of time, expensive in terms of investment. So people wouldn't get that training. Whereas now we can look at it in a virtual way. So maybe there's an opportunity for us to educate the managers out there and give them the right skills, that in turn means that they are going to have better quality conversations and people will get better experiences, and appraisals won't be quite so painful.
So aside from better line management training and better supporting and empowering them, what are some of the things that can be done with the appraisal process to make it better and more effective?
First of all, I would say it should be seen as part of an overall annual cycle, all right, in terms of the process, so that it isn't just something which is looking backwards. It needs to be a balance in terms of, where are we now, and also looking forwards. One of the things that we've found works quite well, and it's just, in order to do that, then each organisation, it's really hard to make it happen unless there is some sort of timetable. Just in reality, unless you set an expectation clearly as an organisation, it's quite hard to have consistency of approach. So when I've talked to these businesses, for example, who said, we've just ditched appraisal, I hate appraisal, we've just chucked it out the window. When you explore it, say, so, okay, how are people feeling? You find it's not like people will, they end up putting something in instead. They sort of say, maybe one-to-ones or something. They have to put something in, because managers do not consistently just talk to people all year round unless there is some sort of process and some sort of clarity of expectation. So they might have rebranded it or called it something else. One model that works quite well, that we've supported a number of our clients to do, is to break it out. So if you think one of the reasons that the epic end of year appraisal can be quite painful is because you're talking about objectives, you might be talking about behaviours and competencies, you might be talking about development and career and your overall evaluation of performance. That's a lot to talk about in one meeting. And the other thing with that is that there's quite a lot of evidence out there that managers are not always open or honest if they're having to rate performance, if they think it's going to impact people's salary or remuneration, but they are more open and honest about things if they think it's for people's development. So we've talked about, maybe if you visualize a clock, is easy to think about it, a sort of cycle where at the start of the year, so 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock, you want to sit down and clearly agree expectations. So you do need to agree what objectives are and what the deliverables are for this year. Really important also in a virtual environment, so that people are clear about what's expected of them when they're not seeing their manager on a daily basis. So they know what they need to do. You should be having regular one-to-ones monthly anyway, but at the end of, let's say, quarter one, that would be an opportunity, in my view, to talk about development. Now, the reason I think you should talk about development then is that I've had a quarter to get on with my objectives, and I might realise that I need some training or support in a certain area in order to be successful. historically, if you talk about training at the end of the year, that kind of is saying it's well, why are you talking about it there? Is it just a thank you? What's the purpose of it? But actually, training should be about supporting you to perform, or it should have a purpose to it. So for me, I think if you talk about that at the end of quarter one, that's one less thing to talk about at the appraisal, but you can have that conversation there. At the 6 monthly point, that's a really good idea to discuss. Yes, where are people against their objectives? So are we on track? Are we off track? Are those objectives still relevant? So it's a bit of a touch base there. But that might also be a good opportunity if you have behaviours or values or something. Maybe that's when we have the conversation about how you're meeting your behavioural expectations. So that could be discussed at that mid-year point. And then at the end of quarter three, that's getting towards the end of the year. So if someone's really doing well, they're on track, it's getting to the point where they might be thinking about what they want to do next. That's a great time maybe to talk about people's career aspirations. So if someone's is performing, then why don't we have that career aspirations conversation? If you break that out, then what you'll find is then the end of year conversation is really quite simple. It's a wrap up where we are. How do we get on overall on our objectives? And what are we going to do next year? So it's quite forward thinking. So it's not as painful, but you've had 4 really good quality, meaningful conversations with slightly different topics at different points in the year. So then you get a nice cycle to it as well.
I'm thinking of appraisals, which I have typically been part of. And it is this meeting which you described. It's this annual thing where you talk about everything. And I've looked at line managers' diaries around that time. And it's basically like a week almost chock full of those meetings. There's virtually no time to do anything else. I'm kind of looking at that line manager, and it's now being suggested to them that they shouldn't just be having 1 meeting with people a year, but they should be having 4 meetings with people a year. And suddenly their diary is going to get fuller and fuller and fuller. And I'm sure this relates back to the point you were making about supporting line managers and where the priorities lie and the culture of the business. But for a line manager who does have other work to do, a job to do, what's the sell for them in terms of having these more regular meetings? That it doesn't seem to them as just being this massive time suck.
You do hear that regularly. So you did answer your own question. I would absolutely say is what is the purpose of the line manager? So the purpose of the line manager role is to help people get results. It's to achieve results through other people. You may be also an individual contributor, and I appreciate that this is that it's eating into time, but it's remember, this is one of the prime purposes of being a people manager, is to support others and getting results. And you can't achieve anything once a year. If you were going on a diet, you wouldn't just get on scales once a year and expect to, perform, to get the weight loss that you wanted to get. People need to have more frequent conversations. In a practical point of view, when I work with some of the public sector organisations, I think some of their appraisals, like it's close to 3 hours, they've got these massive long documents. Arguably, you are shortening that end of year appraisal if you are talking more regularly, because you're talking throughout the year. And what I was describing in terms of that model, in principle, you're taking chunks of conversation out of the end of year appraisal, the development bit, the talent bit, career aspirations piece, and you're discussing those. So you're taking your 3 hour epic and you're dividing it into 4 45-minute sessions, maybe. So in theory, you're not spending more time. The reality is, you probably are spending a bit more time, but you will be getting a lot more value out of it, a lot more engagement, and it's the right thing to do. But it is about us prioritising these things and scheduling them in to our calendars and seeing them and seeing the importance of them.
Where do you stand on 360-degree appraisals? So line managers getting feedback from other people. Is it a nice to have? Is it a not necessary? Is it an absolutely essential?
Oh, it's a really contentious one. That, funny enough, I've just put a podcast episode out today on 360 and managing a program. Personally, I am not a big fan of 360 feedback appraisal forms. And let me explain what I mean by that, because I think there's a difference. I'm a very big fan of 360-degree feedback as a development tool. So you do sometimes see these organisations that they almost want to go out to everyone and say, right, has this person performed or not? And they get this 360 and it comes back and it's almost the computer says that you are a 3.7 in this area. I'm not keen on that approach to appraisal, because I think it takes away the responsibility from the line manager as to when the line manager should be having a conversation about what the expectations are for that role and providing feedback as to whether those are being met or not. In most circumstances, I do appreciate that, let's say you're managing someone that you don't see, that you might not get it, but I don't really feel that 360 feedback I don't think it should be linked to reward, personally. I think it should be used as a development tool. Again, pointing you back at the comment I made earlier, this was research from the CIPD. There was a white paper called Could Do Better, where they showed that people were not honest in terms of feedback. In terms of providing ratings and feedback, if they thought it linked to pay, but they were about behaviours that were developmental. I think 360 is much better to be used as something where it's observable behaviours, and it's built to something that you can develop and support yourself and grow from, as opposed to something which is, right, this is what your performance rating is going to be based on this feedback.
So rather than the feedback being based on scores, being based on perhaps more open questions, what does this person do well?
Comments,
what should
absolutely.
they do more of? What should they stop doing? That kind of thing.
Yeah, definitely. And again, though, that would often be to do with behaviours, wouldn't it, though, rather than do you think this person's met their performance objectives? Because if you've written really good performance objectives that are smart, then it shouldn't be a subjective opinion as to whether or not they've been achieved. It should be, if there are deliverables, you should know whether those, both parties should know whether it's been achieved. Whereas I think 360 feedback, that would be exactly as you're saying, what skills, what behaviours does this person demonstrate really, really well? And what behaviours could they tweak or adjust or improve? And that's much more constructive. And I feel that's where it fits. It is helpful to get feedback from other people, particularly in a virtual environment where we're not seeing people all the time. But I think it's just striking that balance, really. So if you've got smart objectives, it should be easy to evaluate whether people are meeting performance, and behaviours we can develop and grow, and we should feel safe. The feedback in itself is really, really loaded. People get very, very nervous. That's another reason people get nervous about the appraisal. I read something about a neuroscience reference about this, which they were saying that it triggers our fight or flight response. So if you say, I want to give you some feedback, people get fight or flight, people get really quite nervous about it. So it does need to be managed really, really carefully. And if it's links to remuneration, it becomes very highly charged. And I do think that managers should learn to own the feedback, their own feedback, and not be able to just sort of pass it off to other people. So there needs to be a level of responsibility and accountability from them.
And I can certainly see it being very valuable having this sort of 360 feedback where you're in a role which is quite autonomous. So, I'm a lawyer by background, and quite often I will just go and effectively do my own thing. I mean, I'll have people phoning me up and I'll do the work and give them advice, and my line manager might never know about it. And so the only way that I can find out about what these people think of me, and the only way my line manager can find out what people think of me, is by asking them, I think. Yes,
and it is really popular in professional services, and it has a really good, and partners and things like that, it has a really good place there, but it is a development tool there usually. You wouldn't ideally say, okay, you're going to get a pay rise or not because of what's been said in the 360. What should be about is saying, you delivered that client support really, really effectively. It would have been even better if you did this. So it should be more about learning rather than evaluation, I believe.
Yeah, no, that makes complete sense. You've mentioned objectives and smart objectives a few times. Objectives is one of the things I think is particularly challenging, and there will be cases where the appraisee is effectively asked, they might have one or two objectives which are non-negotiable. So, going back to professional services, it might be recording X number of chargeable hours in a year, or billing a certain amount, or that kind of thing. But then otherwise they're asked, just go and come up with some objectives. And then the person who's being appraised thinks, what on earth am I supposed to put here that's meaningful, that's going to be helpful? How can the objective setting process be managed so that it is effective, helpful, and doesn't feel like you're just kind of grabbing onto something just to put anything in there?
This again is about employee engagement and how, to what degree people understand how their role fits into the overall organisation. And again, behavioural science evidence is that if we have a goal that we consider to be stretching but achievable, it's more motivational. Therefore, it is better if we are involved in setting it, because I have a better idea of what's stretching and achievable. But also, do we understand how our little bit of the jigsaw fits into the overall purpose of the organisation? So is it relevant to the overall strategy? So how can we make it? Is largely, if we're in an organisation, do you know what the strategy is? Do you know what the overall goals are? Do you believe in the purpose of your job as to what you're trying to achieve and why? So it's really about us understanding why we've got an objective there and why it's important. So it's and if you are, in a law firm, for example, you might have something to do with a specific area or improving something. So it might be about justice, or it might be about delivering better patient value, helping people feel that why, that motivation as to why having that objective is important, and linking it to the overall purpose in itself is more motivational and more engaging. And that's the problem we have, is where people feel like they're going through the motions. I just can't think of some objectives. Again, think of some objectives. That's the same thing as, well, what's the point of the appraisal? Well, we're all here to do a job, and our job presumably means something within the organisation. So it's about linking it to purpose for me, is the key. It's making people understand how to buy in.
So, final question. There's an employee who listens to what you've been saying, and they think about how appraisals are done at their place, and they think, oh, wow, we could do it a heck of a lot better. But they're not a line manager. They're, part of a team or whatever. What's your advice for that person about how they might be able to start to influence some changes at their own place?
Ask your manager for a one-to-one. Take control. It doesn't have to be done to you. Actually, it's your appraisal. Offer to prep the one-to-one, suggest some objectives, ask for development, book the time in your manager's diary as to when you want these meetings, and take the lead yourself. Say, I think I can do this, or I'd like this development, or this is where I want to go. Can you help me do it? So just very few managers will kind of push back on that, really. But just take control. It's your future. It's your appraisal. It's your career. Take ownership of it and make it happen, I'd say.
Brilliant. That's very, very wise advice. If someone either wants to dive down into this in more detail, or if there's something which particularly has helped you on your journey, are there any particular resources which you can point them to?
There's a couple of things that spring to mind on this topic. One is a book and one is a podcast. So there's a podcast called Squiggly Careers. In fact, they've got a book as well. It's a really popular podcast, but I think that is very practical, and it would play to what we've just talked about there, which is take control of your own career, your own appraisal, those sort of things. So I think that's got some really good episodes in there, some really practical stuff aimed at the individual. And it could well be an individual who might be looking to change career or something like that as well. So I think that's worth checking out. A bit more technical, there's a book called The Leadership Pipeline, which talks about why we have this issue with people management. So they talk about the transitions that we go through from being an individual contributor to, if we move to be a team leader, what we should let go of some behaviours and take on some others. And then if you go further up the organisation, how management should change. So it's about 20 years old. It's by Charan, with Charan, Drotter and Noel. But it's a really, really powerful book, I found. So if you're maybe in an organisation as a manager or in HR or something, then that's a good book to look at.
Brilliant. I'll put links to those in the show notes. And where can people get hold of you?
I'm on LinkedIn, probably is my primary social media, but I have got LinkedIn across that. So it's Lucinda Carney at LinkedIn. You can also go listen to Inters by the HR Uprising podcast, which I host. And I'm on Twitter, usually Lucinda Carney. You'll be able to find me quite easily.
Brilliant. Okay, links to those in the show notes as well. Well, Lucinda, definitely a topic we could dive down for a bit longer, but as an intro, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you very much for having me.
Okay, hope you enjoyed that interview with Lucinda Carney. I was really surprised by how much Lucinda focused on line management generally, and I don't know why that surprised me when it makes perfect sense. If line managers aren't encouraged and supported to find out regularly how their direct reports are doing, then it's no wonder that the annual appraisal system just turns into a bit of a rush where you're trying to cram everything into one annual meeting, usually unsuccessfully. I'm starting to realise just how much this leadership piece feeds into so much that companies can be doing better for their employees, whether it's ongoing performance management, as we discussed with Lucinda, or things like making sure your team is doing the work that makes them happy and that they're good at. Something we discussed with Jack Broadley in episode 111 and also Ken Coleman in 116. If you're a line manager yourself, I'd be really interested to hear your reflections on what Lucinda was saying. And if not, I'd also be interested in hearing from you as to what your experience has been with line managers. Is line management at your place something which is valued and encouraged and time is made for it? Or is it something which people with already too much to do are just doing off the side of their desks as and when they can and just not really doing it properly? Show notes are on the website, changeworklife.com/118 for episode 118. And I know I said this last week, but it'd be really helpful if you would leave a review on Apple Podcasts. So you can go to changeworklife.com/Apple. That's changeworklife.com/Apple. That should take you straight to Apple Podcasts. If you could leave a review, by preference a 5-star review, that'd be great. But it really does help people know that this is a show that with valuable content and that's worth listening to. So if you could just spend a couple of minutes leaving a review, that would be amazing. Next week, we're returning to the subject of coaching, and in particular, what happens when an organisation trains up its own people to act as coaches and effectively employees start to coach each other. It's a really interesting model and lots to dive into, so if you haven't subscribed to the show, make sure that you do, and I can't wait to see you in next week's episode. Cheers, bye.